Hey there, Father Michael here. It's been a minute because I have COVID for the fourth time. Yeah, I am the COVID king. You're talking to him. Today's the first day I've showered in a minute, so if you're doing anything with scratch and sniff, I'm safe today. I'm marked stay safe from body stink. Isaiah chapter 30, verse 21. Whether you turn to the right or to the left, you will hear a voice from behind you saying, "This is the way. Walk in it." I grew up on the water, as many of you know, and I've spent many leisurely hours on the water or near the waters, many lakes and rivers and streams. I've gone to the lake shore less than a mile from where I grew up in the early morning hours to watch the sun slip up over the horizon over beautiful Lake Winnebago. And I have cried, even as a child, at the amazing beauty of this world. I've also traveled to the other side of the lake, the eastern shore, to watch the sunset, that golden light bathing the city where I spent most of my formative years and early adulthood, the lake where I taught my own sons to swim as I myself was taught to swim by my mother. I've taken my boys fishing in many places, rivers and streams, that some of them quite large and vast and fast moving, and some of them barely moving, only a few feet deep. I've chartered boats on the Great Lakes in search of those precious steelhead salmon, which, man, you get a 30-pound salmon on the line, you know some real fishing is going on. These guys can get huge. I want to say like 40 inches long. Growing up where I did in the Midwest, there's so much water to be enjoyed and savored, not only for sporting activities or fun activities, but for spirituality. Water is a restful, peaceful thing for me. And now that I live in a place that is lacking in blue water, it's a struggle sometimes. But growing up, it was different. So much water. And I knew some of the best, most peaceful, quiet spots on the lake where I could drop a line and catch a few lake perch in the early morning hours. The sight of the coastline from the river or from the lake was something that I came to know extremely well. I got very familiar with it from my lifetime of exposure to the geography all around me. And I prided myself on that knowledge. I knew the waterways really well, all around and, the area where I grew up. Or at least I thought I knew those areas pretty well, because then something happened in my 20s that gave me a different perspective. I had my first plane ride. I'm not a fan of takeoffs or landings, to be sure. I'm that guy that gets 2 Xanax pills from the doctor, one for going and one for coming back, because I'm just terrified of the going up and the coming down. But once I'm up there for a minute, once we're safely in the sky, I'm okay looking out the window of the plane. And so flying back into my hometown that very first time, I looked out the window to see if I would recognize anything familiar. The sky was blue, no clouds around. I could see all the way down to the ground. We were only a few thousand feet up. And I could see, first of all, the artificial way that we humans try to leave our mark on God's creation. If you look down, you see everything cut up in nice little rectangles and squares, right? It gives human beings the pretense of having some control over a world where we don't have any control, really, at all. But there they were, those neat little tidy packages. But then I noticed the water, the rivers in particular, and those told a whole different story. For reasons unknown, water does not flow in straight lines in nature. You'd think it would, you know? You'd think if you're flowing downhill, you would just go in a straight line, but that is not what happens, actually. Instead, rivers and streams create turns and twists. There's, a geological term for this called meanders. They create meanders. We don't know why. They just do. And that is exactly what you see when you are several thousand feet above the earth looking down. So from that distance, from that perspective, even the waterways that I thought I knew really well looked really different. There's a trite saying that we clinicians use all the time when we're discussing a difficult client, or maybe a client who is resistant to following our treatment advice. We'll say, well, we'll throw up our hands and say, well, he's a work in progress. Progress, not perfection. It seems to me that both our collective human history as well as our individual stories are both full of meanders and detours, and looking at it objectively, you'd be hard-pressed to really locate any events that are a direct, straight line, cause and effect kind of thing. Some result, A happened, therefore B occurred. Nothing really goes like that. Nothing in our lives really goes in a straight line. If I think about the Exodus story as an example of this, I think it's instructive, because the way that God took Moses and the Israelites into the desert really didn't make a whole lot of sense. They could have made that journey in only a few months. If you look at that geographically, it shouldn't have taken them as long as it did. It took them 40 years to go from point A to point B. And so instead of taking them from, on the shortest distance between 2 points, God led them on a long, grueling, challenging, soul-searing journey through the desert, so they could, in a practical sense, avoid open conflict with the Philistines, but in a spiritual sense, so they could find the space and the time to face their own inner conflicts of wanting instant gratification and wanting to do things their own way rather than be patient and do things God's way. Now that I'm older and allegedly wiser, if I look back over my shoulder to see where I have been in this world, man, there are meanders all over the damn place. There is not one straight line to be found. No, that wasn't a GLBTQ joke, but we'll go with that. There's not one straight line to be found. Like a winding river, my life and yours, I would venture to say, is filled with circuitous changes of direction. Often we double back on ourselves. The path doubles back on itself before we set off in a completely unforeseen, unimagined direction on a new, freshly conceived path. Trying to listen to that inner voice of God telling us what we ought to do. That is an uncomfortable and unsettling process. I know. I've got COVID for the fourth damn time. I'm looking for a direction here and a blessing in this shit show. Progress, not perfection. Whenever we find ourselves in those changes of direction, those meanders that life seems to take us on, the simple truth is that just as those rivers continue to flow, so too will God's gentle guidance continue to take us where God needs us to be. It's all about trusting the current to do with us, to do to us whatever needs to be accomplished. Whether you turn to the right or to the left, you will hear a voice from behind you saying, "This is the way. Take it." Pray with me. Loving, meandering God, we come into your holy, life-changing, direction-changing presence in this moment. Grateful for all the times that we were able to perceive your inner voice. Grateful for the times when we listened to you and did the next right thing. Help us today to choose patience over impatience, to choose going with the flow of the current of this life rather than trying to struggle against it, to choose trust over resistance. For all those who are struggling to find their way in this life, we ask you, send them a sign of your care and love. For all the blessings, the challenges, and all of the endless waiting, we thank you. Amen. God bless you.